I don't mean to derail this, but so you're saying if I got a license, I could have 4 kids and I could have an au pair. That would cancel out the cost of the au pair, and I'd just kind of net the difference. I reckon
So you found an arbitrage.
Yeah. Okay. I'll deal with Michael after this episode. I can promise you no children will be harmed in the making of this podcast.
Welcome to Checks and Balances, brought to you by Partners Life. I'm Michael Vincent. This is James Blair. And today we've got Stephanie Pow from Crayon to talk about cracking the code of childcare costs in New Zealand.
Stephanie, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, childcare costs, just one of the biggest expenses for parents.
Absolutely. Probably the top expense for parents.
Yeah. I mean, so I'll share my story first. So I really didn't know what to expect, but so I've got Cooper in daycare now. We've already gone through foot and mouth and gastro, so we're like starting to get through the other side a little bit, maybe, which is nice until we get some more. You had a stat for me at breakfast, though, that how many respiratory problems does it?
So a healthy child will
no.
have 8 to 12 respiratory infections in a year when they're young.
Yeah.
Right. Basically sick all winter plus some.
Thank you, childcare.
Yeah.
So I had a client come in the other day, shout out to Matt and Jess, and we were talking about childcare costs and private school fees. And they were saying to me that, well, private school fees and childcare costs are relatively similar. And I was like, no, they're not. And then I've got my calculator out, did the math, and I'm paying like $18,000 a year for one child to go to childcare. That's insane.
Yes. So New Zealand, most expensive country in the world for childcare as a percentage of income. A couple who each earn the average wage with 2 kids in full-time daycare can expect to spend 37% of their income on childcare.
Now, Michael, if you have a mortgage and 50% of your income is going to the mortgage, then 37% is going to childcare. That ain't a fun way to live.
I hope you like surviving off like photosynthesis or something, because like I don't know where the money for anything else comes from.
You just see parents outside.
Just baking in this. It's either that or osmosis or something. Yeah.
What? Do we know why it's so expensive in New Zealand? Is the system just broken?
It's hard. That's probably a topic for another podcast.
Yeah.
But there are some government assistance available, but still, I think it's also quite a concentrated market in New Zealand.
Yeah. Geez, that's a lot of cash, and probably I think everybody hears from others that childcare is a big cost, and they know they'll need to run into it. But like, are the parents that you talk to, are they surprised by like the percentage of their income that gets thrown at it?
I think they get sticker shock. When you might think, it's this much a day, but when you say it's actually X amount per year, it's quite confronting in a way.
Yeah. And it's obviously your baby, and you want it to go to a nice childcare, and you want to be, and then you see the price tags, and there's like some emotional pieces to it. It's not black and white, is it? No,
that's right. You're not shopping around for the cheapest deal here, are you?
Yeah. I could go to the warehouse daycare. So
there's a great car park over there. I can just leave them there.
Yeah. Crack the window. That one's free. No, joking. Don't do that. So what are the different options with daycare? Is it just daycare's all the same?
No, and you might have seen some of this, James. It's a whole world out there, right? Which I only discovered when I went to look for my daughter. So there are 4 center-based options and 3 home-based options. So center-based means lots of kids in one place. Let's start from cheapest to most expensive.
Yeah,
cool.
Cheapest, play center. So you go there, but it's parent-led. So even though it's cheap, it's a couple of bucks a week. Your time is the investment, right? And again, potentially not so feasible if you're working a lot of paid hours. The next one up is Tō Kohanga Reo, which is a full Te Reo Māori immersion, whānau-led, similar costs to Play Centre, but again, a lot of your time potentially involved. Then you get to kindergartens. So this is something I only worked out once I tried to put my daughter in one. They only take them from the age of 2 upwards.
Yeah. And
right?
the hours
The hours,
different?
they're more like school hours.
Yeah.
So it might be 8:30 to 3:30. And some of the newer centres might do more extended hours, but it's certainly, for older kids, they tend to be, anywhere from a donation of $10 a week all the way to around $350 per week, right? Depending on, and there's quite a range there. And then you get to what we would call daycares, what most of us would think about when it comes to childcare. And they tend to have longer hours, it might be 7 to 7, etc. They tend to be more expensive. And again, big range here, but you could be looking at, as much as $100 a day, right? So 500 plus a week.
That's pretty much where I'm sitting.
7 is a long shift for a child to put in at a daycare
Hey,
center.
Cooper does it,
Yeah.
and he likes it.
Yeah, does he do overtime as well? Is he going till 7:30 just staying there till the boss leaves?
I tell you what, because the other thing that's quite interesting is obviously the role of, before we get to the home-based options, the role, like I get there, and when I say I get there probably once a week. It's mainly Hannah. When I get there, Cooper's the last one there at maybe like 5:30, and I'm thinking about, well, if I'm getting there at 5:30, like how have all these other kids been picked up? But everybody's got different arrangements with kids, and maybe like grandparents are coming, or maybe you're finishing early. It's a very, lots of people doing different setups, right?
That's right. And if you're working an 8-hour day, your child probably needs to be there 9 hours because you've got to get to work and, come back, etc. So
I know, like Hannah's been having the conversation with me that so since Cooper started going to daycare, she's been working from home because her work is doing like renovations in the office. But soon enough, she'll have to start like going back into the office so many days a week. And she's been talking to me about like, how are we going to get that to work on those days where I need to drop Cooper, get a train into the city, or come with me, and then like a 20-minute walk. And then she's going to be late because of that, like all of those components. And then how is she going to get back before they close? There's just so many elements to it.
Yeah, big logistical challenge.
Yeah. So what are the at-home options?
Yeah, so 3. The first one is home-based network. So you might have heard of names like Pause. It's basically one person in their home looking after up to 4 kids, and there's a maximum of 2 under 2. So they don't have to be qualified per se, but there is a visiting teacher that supervises them. So sometimes it might be actually a parent who's got their kid and then a couple of other kids. So it's a way for them to kind of work, but also earn some income.
Is that like I'm just thinking about the legal requirements. Does that have to be registered? Or
that's right. So you go through a network, they come around, they make sure your house has all the safety requirements. A visiting teacher comes on a regular basis to give feedback and observe, etc. So it's there's some structure around that.
Right.
That sounds like the most stressful thing you could ever put me through. If you said to me, Michael, we're going to give you 4 kids to look after and 2 under 2, I'm not sure I'd survive.
Look, if we're being honest, any responsible parent is not going to be doing that. So I think it's pretty low of your list of concerns in your life at the moment. Okay, Stephanie, on to the other options.
So the cost of that on a per week basis, maybe more around $300 to $600 per week.
Yep.
So sometimes a touch more.
Per kid?
Per child, yeah.
Well, that's not a bad side hustle for me.
Yeah.
Just get one of the boardrooms at the office and just chuck them in.
Mike, what are those 4 kids? Don't worry about.
You can get things that dispense food, right?
It's my side hustle. Yeah. I'll crack the window. That'll be fine.
Yeah. I can just imagine Cooper in the glass boardroom with his like head and then his mouth on the window. Cool. Okay. So 300 to 600.
Ish.
So, I mean, it could be more expensive than...
It is generally a little bit more expensive than daycare, but
so
not
why
always.
would somebody pick that option? Like for me, I'm like, why would I pick that over daycare?
So some people like the small format, you don't have dozens of kids potentially getting your child sick. You've only got 3 others.
Yeah.
And some people just have, like the smaller, it's in an intimate setting that they get one caregiver, consistency.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to a whole team.
Yep.
Yeah, it's a personal preference.
Cool.
Yeah, those kids definitely end up at Steiner schools.
And the other options?
Au pair. So that's usually someone from overseas. Typically in New Zealand, it's a lot of Europeans. Who come out for up to a year on the visa. They live with you. And so it's about $500 per week for, say, a 40-hour week. But obviously, you've got room and board costs with that as well.
Yeah. But that can be like a slightly different setup. Like they're helping with things out of the traditional, just like, say, childcare.
That's right. And that comes down to the agreement that you have with them. But yeah, they might pitch in on laundry and dishes and keeping the house generally kind of tidy-ish, that type of thing.
Yeah. I don't mean to derail this, but so you're saying if I got a license, I could have 4 kids and I could have an au pair, that would cancel out the cost of the au pair and I'd just kind of net the difference. I reckon
So
I'll
you
crack
found
it.
an arbitrage.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. I'll deal with Michael after this episode. I can promise you no children will be harmed in the making of this podcast. Okay, Stephanie, the last option?
Nanny.
Nanny.
That's the most expensive. It's a one-on-one arrangement. And that's probably running, it's about $25 to $35 an hour. So 40-hour week, about $1,000, $1,500 per week.
Yeah. So when we were going through gastro and I was sitting there going, life is hard, trying to look after a baby. Hannah was in bed. It's probably the other way around. But when we were like in that moment going, screw daycare for getting us all sick, we did the math on a nanny and it was pretty much double the cost. Yeah. And we were just like, nah, I can't do it. The other thing we looked at, which we just couldn't find the person to do it with, splitting a nanny. Do many people do that?
No, a nanny share? Yeah. Not in New Zealand. I've seen it overseas, but it does make sense. And even if you have 2-3 kids, potentially a nanny might almost be kind of the same as daycare.
The only worry I have, Mike, is are they going to charge me per child? So like, what kind of discount do I get with a nanny if you go, hey, are you going to charge me our flat hourly rate for your time, or are you going to charge me per child?
You know what? Honestly, all I'm thinking about is how many au pairs and kids we can fit in the meeting rooms, and then effectively you just run like a nanny bank. Yeah. Sorry.
No, most nannies charge you a flat rate.
Yep.
For like 2-3 kids. Maybe when you're getting 4+, there might be some sort of difference.
Yeah. Okay. And what are your thoughts in terms of because I got to be honest, the main thing I only ever thought about was just sending him to daycare. I hadn't really explored any of the other options. What are the popular options in New Zealand?
Daycare.
Yeah.
That would be, there are about 2,500 centres around the country. I think from a cost perspective, it's probably, and also if you're working from a logistical perspective, most people can't go volunteer, etc. So that's probably by far the most popular option.
Yep. And what about, so say in my example, your boy's dropping $18,000 a year in daycare. Stephanie, when do I get a little bit of relief? At what point does your boy get a little bit of government assistance with this?
So there are 3 types of government assistance. The one that applies to every child, it's called 20 ECE hours. It kicks in when they're 3 years old until they're 5. And really the thinking behind it is around school preparedness. So they know that kids who go into a preschool type environment, they do better in that transition to school. So it's available regardless of your family income. And so there's a misnomer. Some people call it 20 free ECE hours. They're not free. It's not 20 free hours because it subsidizes up into the minimum standard of what they expect of childcare. So by definition, that means a staff to child ratio of 1 to 10. And it means that of the staff within that centre, 50% are qualified teachers. Now, if you're at a centre that has a better ratio than that, which many do in New Zealand, or you have higher percentage of qualified teachers, they could charge you the difference.
Yeah. How does, just coming back to Cooper for a second, so he's got a Michelin Chef at his daycare, and I tell you what, the boy loves mince. We get a scorecard every day about like how much he's slept, how much he's eaten, how much he's drank, all that kind of stuff. And like sometimes we'll see like a lentil bean curry, and he doesn't eat that much at home, but I think there's like a what's that book called where the kids all get stuck on the island together?
Oh, Lord of the Flies.
Lord of the Flies. Yeah, I think there's some like.
I wondered where are you going with this.
I feel like there's some.
You think he has the conch?
He's like. I feel like there's some Lord of the Flies stuff going on because he is going. So there's small, medium, large. They've created a field for him called XL, and he is just like smashing his lentil curries and mince at school. Yeah. So anyway, how does the Michelin Chef get applied with the government daycare costs?
Well, that's an extra cost. Again, something that they can charge you on top.
Yeah. So, I mean, the problem with me is I was thinking once he hits 3, it would just be a straight, I would save some money, but you're describing it more as like a matrix of...
You will save some money, but you just might not save as much as you thought you were going to save, potentially, depending on what provider you're with.
And what's the story between 2 and 3? Because some people I talk to go like, it's 2. You were saying it's 3 now. What is the story?
So the confusion comes from last year. Labor in their budget said that they were going to drop the age from 3 to 2. National has come in and said, no, it's going to stick at 3. So it's 3,
Yeah.
the confusion. So that's the first kind of government assistance. The second one is a childcare subsidy. So it's administered by WINS. It's targeted towards low to middle income families, and how much you can get and how many hours you get, et cetera, depends on your family income, depends on how many kids you have, it depends on are you working, studying, et cetera. So that's not a straight formula. That is quite the algorithm. You can actually go on their website. MSD has a check what you can get tool. So if you put in some numbers, it will spit out an estimate for you, and then you've got to apply formally. So that can be available from as soon as your child needs care. There's no age restriction on that, so to speak. And there's actually a company that also won a subsidy called Oscar for after school care. So even once your child goes to school, if you're working, etc., and you need some after school care, you can potentially get that subsidy as well. So to give you a ballpark figure, the childcare subsidies, if you just had one child, once your family income is above $111,000 combined, you're not really eligible for anything. But again, it changes depending on how many kids. So worth going on there and just take you a couple of minutes.
Yep. Any other government benefits to go through?
There's hopefully one coming. So part of National's campaign was a policy called Family Boost. It's going to be a tax rebate from the IRD up to $75 per week in childcare costs. If you're earning as a family $140,000 or less, you can get the full amount. Then it starts to decrease. Once you earn more than $180,000 as a family, it goes to 0.
So James, before we continue, I have got a special announcement.
Have you started sticking to your budget?
Absolutely not.
You finally made it as an after-hours DJ.
I wish. Mate, the thing is, we have got a brand new podcast partner, Partners Life.
You mean the award-winning insurance provider with over 300,000 Kiwis insured?
Yep, they're also a New Zealand-operated company, and they are passionate about increasing financial literacy amongst Kiwis.
Sounds like a great match. Where can I learn more about them?
Check out their website in our show notes below.
Really thought DJ Magic Mike was going to be a global sensation for a second. You mentioned once children, they want to encourage you to get ready for school once you're 3. I see like conflicting research, and I'm probably a good example of like I haven't spent a lot of time going on it, but you get like anecdotes here and there. Having your child at like the research around having your child at daycare and their development versus having them at home. And if you don't know anything about the subject, just tell me so. But I heard it's better to keep your child at home in terms of their development. Have you got any thoughts on the?
I think that's such a tricky one. Like if you think about the parent guilt that goes along with that. But this is what we do know about childhood development. First 1,000 days, super critical. And that 1,000 days actually starts in vitro. So 1,000-day pregnancy to the age of 2. And by that stage, 85% of the size of their brain is developed within that period, right? So, and obviously a lot more happens after that, but the research shows that it's disproportionately important that time in terms of life outcomes. So that's one thing to keep in mind. What are the things that affect that? There's some really interesting research out of Harvard on this. There were 2 main factors. One was what they call return and serve. So it's the interaction. So all that goo goo gaga that you do with kids, it turns out it actually helps them, their neural pathways develop.
I still do it with Mike to this day.
Still helping Mike's brain training.
Yeah.
So that's one thing, that interaction really fosters that. And then actually on that, if you Google still face experiment, there's a really good example, and it's a very short video of like what happens when a parent is interacting and then what happens when a parent isn't interacting. And then the other one is stresses. So extreme stress at an early stage also has, unfortunately, a negative impact on brain development. So that's kind of the research at a high level. And so whether it's home or daycare, etc., if you think about that interaction piece, arguably the more interaction that they have and the more one-on-one attention or the more etc., potentially that helps their brain. But if they're at daycare, but then you're spending a lot of time with them, doing all those things and activities or just not even activities, just entertaining them, then I'm sure they're going to get what they need to get anyway, right? But that's probably the way to think about it.
Yeah, it's a good way of describing it. And so we've talked about the costs of childcare, but there's also a lot of other costs when you're returning to work. I know one of the ones that has surprised us the most is my wife Hannah has taken more sick leave since she's gone back to work and Cooper's gone to daycare than she has the rest of her career. It's probably one of those ones that people don't think that much about going, I'm actually going to have to take a lot of time off work once I go back to work.
That's right. And it's so frustrating, right? Like I think I've been to the doctors more with my kids than I ever have for me personally, whether it's an ear infection or fever or what have you. So yeah, that's a real hidden cost that I think a lot of us don't anticipate when we become parents of actually this kid's going to be sick. 8 to 12 times for a healthy kid with a respiratory infection, hand, foot, and mouth, gastro, conjunctivitis, all those wonderful things that they get.
Flashbacks, Stephanie.
Yeah.
Flashbacks.
So that's one cost. The other thing to think about is what are the other costs beyond the fees that you're going to get charged. So is there an enrollment fee? Usually that might be $50, $100, et cetera, to secure your place. Sometimes there's even a waitlist fee. So that's different to the enrollment fee, which is, you put a deposit down. So it might be the equivalent of 1 week of fees or a month of fees that you will get back as a, kind of redeemed against fees once you start there. But if you're on a couple of wait lists, you might end up writing off a couple of those waitlist fees, right? Then, we touched on the extras. So is there food included? Do they use reusable nappies and they're going to charge you for the laundry service on that? What other optional activities? My kid plays play ball at kindy, right? So that's an extra, however much per week.
I can just imagine Mike thinking about all of the surcharges he can put on the boardroom with all these kids now.
Oh, it was when I was in business banking a long time ago at Westpac. The childcare centres and daycare centres make so much money that the credit policy and how stringent you have to be with their lending is very relaxed. Whereas usually with a commercial property you can go like 65-50% of the value of the property you can lend. Childcare centres, you can basically go like 90-100% because they know it's such a surefire industry. The only risk that you identify is political risk or regulatory risk where they might change the regulations. Apart from that, they print money.
Yeah. So you get charged a surcharge for playing with a ball? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, or someone comes in, yoga or what other activities that a kid might have or they might run and they're optional.
It's not that I want to set up one now. I just want to go back and just do that. Like if we just go to daycare.
How much do you pay? Off the top of your head, do you know what the surcharges you pay for the playing with balls?
I want to say it's like $10 or $20, and it's optional. But the question is, do you want your kid to be the only one sitting on the side, not being able to participate?
There's a little gate in the corner, face the wall while the rest are playing with the ball.
Goes to grab the ball. No.
Your parents are too cheap for this.
Well, and then have someone external come in and run it. It's not the teachers doing it. But it's ball skills and hand eye.
Yeah. Imagine that being your job.
That's what I mean.
I don't want to say a ball specialist, but
Yeah. Minimum hour commitments. Some might say actually you need to do 3 days a week with us or 2 days a week. And do you need that many hours?
That's a really good point. And so much love to my dad and my stepmom. They've been really good. Fun fact, Stephanie, my parents have moved house about 13 times in 10 years while living in New Zealand.
Wow.
It's just their addiction. They love to move for some reason. They haven't moved in the last 14 months. Any guesses why?
They're really close to you and Cooper.
Yeah. They're 800 meters away, but they were like, oh, we would like to have a day a week with Cooper. And I was like, hey, I love you guys want to do that, but they travel a bit and we've got family in Sydney. And I'm like, there's not an option for the days you're going to be here and the days you're not going to be. We have to pay for the day. So I feel like a couple of other misconceptions would be, it's not like you can pick and choose what day your kid's at daycare versus not it, and then you pay per day, right? The daycare's you have locked in this day, another kid can't have it, because that's the other bit. You're fighting with other parents to get your kid into the daycare you want to get them into. And the other piece for our one is, so Hannah works 4 days a week. And so we're paying for 4 days. They go, hey, will you get the 5th day for free? But of course, Hannah doesn't want to do that because she wants to spend the day with Cooper. So it's not like we're getting any discount. So all of those things are just things you learn as you go.
Absolutely. And I remember even when my daughter was on 3 days and we wanted to add a day, it was like, oh, there's a wait list for that Thursday, right? See you in 6 months or 12 months. You're like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, that's another thing. What's their holiday policy? What's their sick leave policy? So, for example, at my daughter's daycare, after you've been there for 12 months, they'll let you have, I think it's 2 weeks at 50% fees if you want to go. But, that trip to Fiji just got a lot more expensive because you're still paying some of that cost, right? So that's something you want to ask about. And then one tip I was told by someone who had opened, I think, 250 daycare centers, Monday and Fridays are more expensive because you're more likely to take those days off. go for a long weekend or something like that and pay for the day that you don't need.
We're in the wrong game. What are we even doing? We should open a daycare center. We should open 250 of them.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. I mean, there's just a lot to learn of that. I mean, the takeaway for me has been there is somebody who rocks around with like a bag of balls and charges $10 a kid to.
Yeah, I guess it's one of those things where it's very difficult to say no when someone's putting a price on, can my child play with the other kids effectively? Can I go for a long weekend with the kid and have a holiday? It feels like you kind of must feel guilty just ratcheting up these charges on people, but it's like, it's an emotional thing. You're like, I want the best for my child. I want to spend time with my child. So whatever the cost is what the cost is.
That's right.
Weddings, babies, funerals.
Exactly.
Right? That's where the money's at. What about some tips around like picking a daycare? How do you pick a daycare?
And it's hard. I think Mike touched on it. It's quite an emotional decision, right? It's not just a checklist, etc. So first off is identify which option, right? If it's a daycare, but even within that, they have different, like, is it Montessori or is it play-based or is it Waldorf, or, there are different philosophies per se.
Yeah.
But I think get onto it early,
yeah.
right? Like wait lists, sometimes upwards of 12 months, right? So even, while you're pregnant, go find some. Most people will find a daycare within 2 kilometers of work or home. So, they get on there and have a look. Kindello's a website that has every daycare in New Zealand on their map. So you can go there, find what's in your area, go visit them, right? Go see 3 to 5 because they're very different, and you'll pretty quickly work out which ones you like or don't like. Don't go on an open day. Like, go book in a visit. Like, you don't want it to be the shiny version.
Yeah.
You want to go in and see it like it normally would be if your kid were there, right? Go see and then have, a standard set of questions that you ask them. So what's the transition plan for your child? What does a normal day look like here? Obviously, what's the fees and all the costs and the policies that we talked about? If there's something that's important to you, like, do you provide food, or, what's your philosophy on this? Is it structured learning, unstructured, etc.? Have a set of questions, because the answers you get from that, you can pretty quickly think, oh yeah, that's the one I want. And then if you find one that you want, but it's just that little bit out of your budget, have a conversation with them. You've got to remember that for daycares, the money from parents is not their only source of revenue. They get government funding, and government funding depends on heads and occupancy, right? So potentially, depending on the daycare, they may make, some sort of temporary reduction, or, there might be a conversation to be had on it. Or it might be, nope, we've got a big wait list. Sorry, see you later.
Yeah.
But if you don't ask, you don't get.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just quickly, the math on booking out a daycare 12 months or more in advance. How does that work?
What do you mean? But if you're pregnant and you take some parental leave.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's probably adding up a little bit more for me.
unless you're drop and go day one.
Yeah, day one. Yep, that probably makes a bit more sense. I was thinking about the math on the pregnancy for a second. What about when it comes to like getting food at a daycare? Like, do most of them give the kids food?
I think it's about 50-50 these days.
Right.
And certainly some of those newer centers, I mean, they have pretty swish menus. I would be happy eating off that daycare menu.
Like I said, Michelin Chef at Cooper's daycare. But yeah, I do agree. There's differing degrees of daycares, ratios to kids, their views on, what they do with the kids and all that kind of stuff, and how they keep them entertained, and lots of things to work through and working out what's the right fit for you.
There's much more variation than you would anticipate, right? And you touched on that percentage of qualified teachers, and the ratio, also another really good one to ask about. And look, the earlier that you get on with it and the more knowledge that you have, because it is a kind of whole new world, the better you'll feel about going back to work, right? Because you'll feel like, I've made a choice that I'm happy with.
Yeah. Cool. Did you learn something new today, Mike?
I learned a lot.
You're going to start a daycare business,
Yeah,
aren't you?
I learned that let's just skip the finance stuff and go straight to opening 250 daycare
I
centers.
tell you what, Stephanie, I reckon the probability on Monday morning is about 65%. I rock into the office and Mike's there with like 10 kids in the boardroom. Where did you get 10?
No, the au pair is there with 10 kids in the boardroom.
Yeah. Where did you get
2? Yeah.
Where'd you get 10 kids in 48 hours, Mike? He's like, stop asking questions. Cool. All right. So make sure to go check out the Crayon website. Some really good tools. It's really all about education and transparency, isn't it, Stephanie?
Yep. The finances of having a kid.
Yeah. Awesome. So thank you very much for joining us. Please make sure to subscribe, review, and like. And a big thank you to Partners Life.
Cheers.